Culture actually occurred in August of 1955. Very few people want to talk about it. In 1955, of course, Emmett Till was murdered by fellow citizens, victim of U.S. terrorism. The body thrown in the Yazoo River, Tallahatchie Bridge, under the Tallahatchie Bridge. But his body was brought back to Chicago. And the first major civil rights demonstration took place. 125,000 fellow citizens walked by to take a look at Emmett Till. His mother left the coffin open so they could see. It's a Pilgrim Baptist Church led by the Reverend Julius Caesar Austin. And he introduced Mom's Till Mabley, and she walked to the lectern. She looked over at her baby, whose head was 5 times the size of his normal head. And she looked in the eyes of America as well as the folk at Southside Chicago. And she said, what? I don't have a minute to hate. I'm going to pursue justice for the rest of my life. That's a level of spiritual maturity and moral maturity that does not give up on the Socratic attempt to interrogate the mendacity and hypocrisy of American life, but is rooted in something deep. It's rooted in an attempt to keep track of the humanity of the very people who have dehumanized you. Use that as a standard of responding to terrorism in light of the last 2.5 years. My God, how fascinating. Here's Moms Mabley speaking on her behalf and speaking for the best of tradition. Martin King's in the background. Fannie Lou Hamer's voice is there. A. Philip Randolph's voice is there. And many nameless and anonymous black leaders who knew they had to deal with a situation in which they were unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who they were. That's what it meant to be a nigger. Unsafe, unprotected, subject to unjustified violence, and hated. Now, after September 11th, all Americans feel unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated. You say, now that the whole nation's been niggerized, let's see what the response is going to be. Interesting. I come from a tradition that says, in the face of terrorism, it's justice, not sweet revenge, not short-term retaliation. It's justice. Hunt them down if they've committed a crime, yes. Demonized? No. And even within the black tradition, if there are black folk who demonize, they are criticized based on that tradition in light of their not aspiring to the standards of Emmett Till's mother. And if that's the case, that's certainly the case for George Bush and other leaders. Crucial, indispensable, bringing together the best of the legacy of Athens, the best of the legacy of Jerusalem, but in the New World context in which legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, police brutality, lynching, discrimination, redlining and bank loans, on and on and on. Always connecting one's vision about one's own freedom to plight and predicament. And sisters from New York and Boston made it out to Santa Fe trying to get a little distance from urban context. I can understand that. But you bring that tradition with you, because even in Santa Fe, the same struggles go on. Context a little different, bluer sky, okay. More beautiful mountains, yes, okay, I grant you that. No doubt. But you are the same moral, spiritual, politically committed human being here that you were in New York and D.C., Philadelphia, Chicago, wherever else you come and meet those who have been here for a long time. Brown brothers and sisters. Go back generation after generation after generation. Of course, our indigenous brothers and sisters, century after century after century. Cities, unavailable health care for 44 million fellow citizens. Difficulty with gaining access to child care, especially given the welfare reform signed by a spineless Democrat named Bill Clinton. Playing political football with the lives of poor people to win the next election, trying to triangulate with the Republican Party. He ought to be ashamed of himself. Now, he's a friend of mine. I've told him this, so I'm not speaking behind his back. I told him this in the White House, why I didn't vote for him the second time. But I supported him when they tried to impeach the brother. I thought that was wrong. But just plain speech, frank speech. That's all. Just trying to tell the truth with love. In the spirit of self-criticism. Can't even criticize the government's policies without being cast anti-Semitic. You say, wait a minute. Now you got the Israeli left engaging in such powerful critique of their government. If they can do it in Tel Aviv, how come you can't do it in Chicago, New York, and Santa Fe? Anti-Semitism is a vicious bigotry, form of bigotry. There's no doubt about that. It can also be used to silence critics. You've seen a variety of different languages deployed to try to hide and conceal certain truths that ought to be highlighted. Black folk do it, white folk do it, women do it. Politicians won't mention one word about the prison industrial complex. They have a whole presidential campaign and election. There's no talk about the connection between the criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex, because they've all agreed to be hard on crime. And hard on crime means war of drugs against poor young people, disproportionately black and brown. And this goes for those black folk in the Democratic Party. I was just with Brother Jesse 2 days ago with the Rainbow Coalition. I said, Brother Jesse, it's good to see you stepping out, brother. He's getting upset. He was just at Benton Harbor, Michigan. You all know what happened there. Another instance, peak of an iceberg. Part of the 112 yearly young black people who were shot down like dogs by police who happened to pull the trigger when their backs were turned. And we figure, oh my God, Rodney King, glad we hadn't heard about that again. Happening all the time. Cincinnati, Benton Harbor, Los Angeles, New York, over and over again. A lot of black leaders don't want to talk about it. People ask me, oh, Brother West, why are you hanging around with Al Sharpton? Al Sharpton needs to get a haircut. Well, I'm concerned about his brain. What's he thinking? His heart, his soul. Got a flawed history? Absolutely. Absolutely. Has he changed? Is he speaking any truths that make sense vis-a-vis other candidates in Democratic primary? I'm just raising questions. I'm not proselytizing. Just raising questions. But who's going to talk about a criminal industrial complex? 2 million fellow Americans in jail. 50% black. 46% of young black men between 16 and 25 in Baltimore, Chicago, part of the criminal industrial complex. What does it take in the black community? How many of your children need to be in prison before you get indignant? Unless you think somehow they're genetically inclined. We still got fellow Americans who think that. There'll always be some of those folk around. White supremacy dies very slowly, even on the pseudoscientific front.
What happens when it begins to escalate? The fastest group going into prison right now is poor white brothers. I'm just as concerned about them as I am poor black. They're human beings like anybody else. Where is the focus? Or do we have to wait until the criminal justice system begins to expand over Princeton and University of Chicago, Stanford? Oh, we think we got a crisis with our young people at this point. I think we really need to do something serious. Michael Moore showed that so well in his film, Caliban. Black kids, brown kids been shooting each other down for decades. You get one major shootout in white America, everybody stops. Got to be very sensitive here. These are very complex situations. This is got to be nuanced here. These are nice kids. They're like us. They're all American, Oh, I see. Very different approach here, huh? What a situation. What are we to do? On the blue note, no optimism here. The evidence does not look good. Be a freedom fighter in the 21st century is to make a radical distinction between hope and optimism. One must be a prisoner of hope. Yes. Unconditional commitment to mustering the courage to think critically, speak freely. Unconditional commitment to a courage to try to keep track of the humanity of each and every person, the courage to love, serve, and sacrifice. And an unconditional commitment to fight for democracy in its substantive form, a rich public life, a pervasive common good with the private sector and its precious rights and liberties protected, yes, but balanced in such a way that it does not suffocate the public forms of expression or community, of what holds us together, what connects us, so that our glue does not become so weak that we end up so polarized that we're at each other's throats, in part because we're not organized and mobilized against those powers that be at the top. How rare it is in American history when significant enough numbers of the citizenry can organize and look upward, confront the powers that be, rather than scapegoat the most vulnerable. That's the easiest thing, you see. And in the end, we're talking about leadership that has a blue note and a blue sensibility, but it's also a leadership that, by example, in being willing to speak, act, write, fuse, share, laugh, love with others, that it can inspire others, so it becomes contagious. There's never any guarantee of any victory in history. Never. Never been, never will be. But if we can convince each other to become less conformist and less complacent, more Socratic, more prophetic, more radically democratic, we have a chance. And I hope and pray that each one of you, in wrestling with these questions, try to take seriously the Socratic and prophetic and democratic challenge that I've put forward tonight. Thank you all.